Well, friends, welcome to our weekly American Mussar community gathering. We have this week and next week before we take a break for the Psalm 27 workshop, which I hope you will all join. And there's been information about that in the email. Also today after at 5 o'clock, if anyone wants to stay and they have kind of a personal question they want to get the group's feedback on, we can do that today. We will try to kind of bring a Mussar lens to that. But we did this once before kind of spontaneously, and there was some thought maybe it's something we could try again. So that is a possibility for today. For now, let's get started as we always do with a short meditation. So please relax and close your eyes and take in a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. Again, inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. If thoughts should come into your head, just observe them and let them go. Like watching a car pass by on the road. Now is not the time for solving problems. Right now, all you need to do is inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And on your next inhale, say to yourself, Shema. And on the exhale, listen. Shema. Listen. In Shema, we're listening deeply, without judgment, without offering advice. In Shema, we are listening with an open heart. Shema. Listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Well, to get us started, thought we could check in and see if anyone tried an equanimity practice or how equanimity might have showed up for you in the last week. For those of you who are here, you remember in our breakout groups, we tried to figure out, well, what soul trait was causing me to lose equanimity, or what is something that I could do to try to bring equanimity into my life. And if you weren't here, you could just kind of share maybe a Mussar challenge that came up for you. So anyway, I'll stop the share here. I don't think I need to cut and paste this. It's a pretty easy question. So who would like to share? Bonnie.
So one of the traits, the soul traits that I struggle with is patience. And I handle the finances for my grandson who's in college. And he doesn't really understand, I don't think, financial responsibility. And he presents me with very strange requests to use his college funds. And I have to work really hard to not say, are you an idiot? you don't want to say that to your own grandson, but to reframe the kinds of things like now I can say to him, well, what do you have a plan if this money isn't going to make it through 4 years of college?
Mm.
And I can't, he just doesn't have the experience.
Mm.
And I have to keep remembering that. There are other 20-and-a-half-year-olds I know out there who are much more savvy than he is. So that's what I'm really struggling with, is not comparing him, but being patient and hoping that some of this will rub off. And I would love to hear how other people respond to that.
Respond to that situation.
No, patience.
Ah, gotcha.
Patience.
Okay, well, thank you, Bonnie. We're listening with an open heart. That sounds like a very challenging situation. Anyone else care to share how equanimity sort of showed up for you this week, or how another soul trait impacts your equanimity? We've got my good friend, Mr. Finn here. Joanne, was that your hand?
No, though I was trying to think about this because, I was getting upset about this. I don't know, the sort of friends with benefits, but I don't know if it really benefits me situation,
Hmm.
and why, I guess I get angry, and I don't know if I'm being off the wall. Like a lot of times I have been with my son, like saying, why did you do so? And it was something I did, I turned out. And so that kind of thing. I don't want to accuse anyone of doing something, but I shoot, so this man at the community garden was very nice when I told him my diagnosis, and he said, oh, and I'll help you with your plot. And he's a wonderful gardener and farmer, and he put so much stuff in there, which about half of it disappeared, and we think either animals or people took some of it. But he said something to me offhanded about, oh, the tomato season is over. And I was like, and I thought about that, and I said, no, because he wants to put in more squash. So I sent him a text saying, please don't uproot my tomato plants and something, and the greens, because there's kale and Swiss chard, which is wonderful, and it's great to have fresh produce. And he answered me back as if I had accused him of doing that already. And I didn't. I just said, don't do it, and just leave those there because I want them. So I don't know if it was a miscommunication or I'm not so trusting of this fellow, because, I found out that he wasn't just being out of the goodness of his heart. He wasn't, he had some ulterior motives, including, I think, wanting to put, even though he's got a greenhouse at home, he's got a garden at home, and he's got a couple of plots at the garden. He wanted to plant some stuff in my garden that maybe stuff he wanted, not necessarily stuff I wanted. So I don't know what to say. I guess it's lack of trust that caused me to lose my equanimity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Joanne. Wendy. Please remember to unmute.
Of course you couldn't hear me. I said, let me know if you can't hear me, because I'm in Mammoth and it may cut out some. But I wasn't even really thinking about equanimity. We got ready to drive here. We had a 2-day drive and we had to go through Las Vegas. And I found trust is a springboard to equanimity. And then I also found that equanimity is contagious all the way around. People are not thinking about it, but if you have equanimity, all of a sudden they do.
Mm.
We decided to just go, and we thought, oh, there'll be plenty of hotels north of Vegas. That's not true, but we didn't know. We'd never been. And
Mm.
so we pulled into, well, we went through Vegas, and I said, look, let's just get off here and let's ask. And my husband reminded me, gas stations.
Wendy, you're breaking up a
So I
little.
went into a little store and I asked somebody, and they probably going to do that. So anyway, we went into the hotel, and they said, no, we don't have a place. And I just all of a sudden, instead of being my normal freak out self, I just said, oh, it just feels like this is where we're going to stay tonight. And I just looked around and I said, I just know there's a room for us. And we just kind of waited. It was amazing because people started helping us left and right. And if I would have just started my normal, so we did get a room there. And it was just because of trust somehow, I think. Because like Bonnie, I was thinking it was patience, but in this particular case, trust was the springboard.
Thank you, Wendy. That's a powerful example. I turned off your video because you were breaking up just a little bit. And I think that helped us hear your audio to do that.
Okay.
Anyone else care to
Do
share?
that.
I had an interesting experience. I have been at a conservative shul where I did my internship at Beth Jacob in Redwood City. I wanted to go, I've been going back there to get some more practice on the pulpit. And so the prior 2 weeks, I was leading the Musaf service, which is this extra service on Shabbat, which you would see in conservative or Orthodox synagogues. And what I found was that if I am by myself at home practicing, I can do it perfectly. And in the real life setting, when people are coming and going and there are microphone problems, I was having a lot of issues. And it wasn't, I was making mistakes, and I was making a lot of mistakes, like mispronouncing a word, that's none of it's a big deal particularly, but it was beyond just mispronouncing a word. It was losing my place in a prayer that I've done, a lot of times. And as we've been talking, I'm realizing that this is kind of an equanimity issue, and that I'm actually thinking of enlisting my wife and daughter to help me practice by having conversations in the background, or I'm practicing officiating at funerals and having those are going to be emotionally loaded situations. So I can't just anticipate that just because I can do everything, at home in perfect conditions, that, I'll be as good out there. So I think practicing with noise in the background, or walking around, or people talking, or maybe even, pretending to cry. These are things I think that will help me kind of keep my equanimity in real life situations. All right, I have to let the cat out of the room. There we go. All right, so let's go a little bit deeper. May I have a volunteer to read these bullets?
I'll read.
Great.
Yirah does not translate directly to English. It can be either fear or awe. Yirah of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs 9:10. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Awe of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Thank you. So what are people noticing? What are the sort of different reactions you might have to the different translations, and how how do you see them as different? I'm going to stop the share here. Yes, Ron.
I think fear, the way it's being used in this proverb, it's a way to motivate people. If you want to follow the rules, a lot of the ancient texts describe Yirah as fear of God. And that's the way they wanted to motivate people. If you had a fear of God, then you would be motivated. Now, awe of God is something entirely different. Awe of God, when you walk to the edge of the Grand Canyon and you look out, it's not so much fear that you're experiencing as more of a wow. When you see a sunset, it's more of a wow. And actually, when you really get down to the nitty gritty, everything in the world that's mundane is even a wow. So awe is I believe, awe is a much more inspiring, if not motivational tool.
Thank you, Ron. I love that. Stephanie, Bonnie, you had your hand up at one point. Is that?
Well, I don't know Proverbs. I don't know well enough to know when, since it's not translatable. So Yirah is going to appear in different places. I don't know enough to say where else does it appear to know how it's translated in terms of awe versus fear. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're asking a question, how common the word is and where else
Yeah.
we might see it. It's fairly common. And it's also in the liturgy and prayers quite a bit. And it's almost always translated as fear, like in the prayer book.
I'm curious to know if it would be translated today, whether it would be translated as fear. That perhaps those translations are older and people had different reactions then.
Yeah, we could look at like a Mishkan HaNefesh and see how it's translated in there. But even like, the prayer books that we would have, they may be older, but they're, within the last 10 or 20 years. It's not like they're hundreds of years old. Joanne.
Yeah. So I have a Koran Siddur that was translated by Rabbi Sachs, and it has that quotation, beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. It says fear. And so that's recent. And the other thing is, now I'm not really remembering, and I'll have to ask him again. But when it says in a text that someone is God-fearing, I'm not sure exactly what that means. That they behave in a certain way, maybe more circumspect about their behavior, more aware of it, maybe, to not be a Vildachaya, it's to me, it's more in line with Mussar, actually. That's what I think.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. And it's great expression, a God-fearing person. They're considered upright, they're considered to be, a good, person who does things the right way. But what is that about? Why is God-fearing like used in such a desirable way? It's like, well, we should all be God-fearing. We're willing to do as God wants us to do, because we don't want to get in trouble with the divine. Ron and then Karen.
Wanted to say real quick that the reform movement is in the process of getting away from the idea of fear. I was at Minyan this morning, and the rabbi spoke about what type of relationship would you want to have with your father? Do you want to fear your father, or do you want to love your father? Do you want to be in awe of your father, or do you want to fear your father? Do you want to fear your father's wrath? Do you want to fear that your father will not love you anymore if you don't abide by the rules? It was an interesting discussion. And like I say, I believe that currently, at least in the reform movement, they're trying to get away from the idea of fear of God as a motivational tool.
It's, I think, from a psychological standpoint, fear is not a great motivator, at least in the long run. Short run, you can get results, but it's kind of alienating. Karen.
The only connection that I really see between awe and fear is that awe is a very exaggerated feeling. So much so that when we're in awe of something, let's say in awe of God, we realize that there's a tremendous amount of unknown. And we are likely to have a fear of the unknown. To use the word awe in a lighter sense doesn't really make that connection. So I think awe isn't about how wonderful something is. Awe is something that is difficult to explain, difficult to really behold. And because of that, there's an unknown aspect. And so that also brings a little bit of fear. And I think that's maybe why, or at least that's how I see that fear and awe can be two sides of the same coin, very thin coin.
Thank you, Karen. And yeah, I mean, Yirah doesn't mean awe or fear. It means both in some ways. You know, we're struggling to translate it into English. But when we make a translation choice, we put an interpretation on. And those interpretations can be really important, and especially between fear and awe. Those are, you know, I think what we're talking about are pretty radically different meanings. Wendy.
I just had a couple thoughts. I mean, I'm using you as a really big term, but you, I mean, people usually anyway, you don't fear what they don't know. And so to fear something is to understand it. So to fear God is to come closer to God, to me, and understand God's qualities and understand, just understand. And then awe, you see something, you say, how did this happen? How great is this? You really don't understand it, but then it's the same but different than fear. It's like almost opposite, but you know how you have the circle and the two things that come together really closely in the circle, they're really close to being the same thing.
The Venn diagram.
The diagram of well, I'm thinking more about the political thing, like totalitarianism to one of the other ones. It comes really close to being the same.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, I mean, I don't always think about fear as, I think it's an interesting connection of fear to curiosity. It's not something that I've sort of thought about it, or fear to knowledge, because I sometimes get afraid when I don't know about things. But this is also, when we're talking about Yirah, it's not just kind of generic fear. You know, it is related to like fear of God or awe of God. So it's a complicated thing to kind of sort out. I'm going to move us ahead and share another. Harry, were you starting to put your hand up? You can remember to unmute, please.
Unmute. Yeah, I just remembered growing up, the fear that my father put in me for, eating non-kosher foods, not davening, not going to Shabbos. I guess that's where Jewish guilt comes from, right? We're masters of that. So I just want to just remember that fear that I had. But I've sort of got over with, but it's still there, some of it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think I sort of have this image of my father or someone, I'm going to put the fear of God in you, or I'm going to put the fear of God in them. And, it's.
I guess when you're young, that's the only thing they got.
Yeah.
Besides the strap.
Indeed. Okay, so I have here a quote from Rabbi Israel Salanter, and he was really a revolutionary figure in Mussar. In the 19th century, he started the Mussar movement in Lithuania, really reformed Mussar yeshivas, but he was very much a fear of God guy. And so a lot of times his writings, we don't read them that often because he's really so hardcore about, and I took this one and I modified it and I took out all of the unimaginable punishments and the after death that we will experience if we, blah, blah, blah. But because I thought I wanted to say, well, what can we, learn from him and what can we take from this? So may I have, we'll spend a little while kind of going through this. So may I have a volunteer to do some reading? Wendy.
The second one,
I will start with the first one.
what is fear of the divine and how is it acquired? It is fear of punishment. Yet a person will not restrain themselves from sinning through mere knowledge.
Okay, so let me pause you there. And I do agree with this basic point. And in the book, I called this chapter the fear of consequences, because there is something to be learned from, actions have consequences. And, Bonnie, I see you nodding, and that's sort of part of what you're trying to teach your grandson. I think it's like, hey, if you spend all this money, what happens with year 4 of tuition? And what does that look like? But just the knowledge is not necessarily enough. Again, I hope it's okay that I'm using this as an example, but if you run out of money, then it may not be able to pay tuition. And then would you get a job or go to night school or, so that doesn't necessarily translate to action. So how do we acquire this? That's kind of what he's writing about. Okay, Wendy, please continue.
Only by arousing the soul will this concept be firmly planted in one's consciousness. Only by expanding it with vivid conceptualization and fervent visualizations that are unique to each individual. Furthermore, involve the whole body in these imaginative exercises by dramatically moving one's limbs, shaking one's arms, and gesticulating with one's hands in an integral factor of this in-depth study.
Okay, thank you.
Rabbi Israel.
Thank you. Okay, I am going to stop the share, and then I will share this in the text box. And I think what we're seeing is some of the
Greg?
sort of,
Excuse me, Greg,
yes,
Wendy, would you be able to put me back on video before the chat room?
yeah. Let's give it a try now. How's that?
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So I don't know, I was quite taken with this, and it went in a very unexpected direction. So what are you seeing in his description? How do we, you know, what's his prescription for developing this fear of God, or this awe of God? Yes, Yanis.
I view this that if I'm driving on a school zone and it says 40 kilometers per hour in miles, maybe 30 miles an hour, and underneath there is a sign that I will be cautioned if I speed faster. But it doesn't say, it says that's a speed limit, and if you break it, I will be punished by fine. In Canada, we have point system, all of that. So basically, you do that a couple of times, your insurance will go up. So if you don't fear the consequences, then you are not going to obey to the rules. And today I see in the younger generations, when I do psychotherapy with them, they don't have that fear because the democracy, I have a right, I'm a human rights, I have rights, it all became rights, no responsibility. So I think so Yirah is more like a fear and awe, great responsibility and a better human being.
Yeah, there's a quote that that we won't have time for today. Maybe we'll include it next week, which is that Yirah is kind of a keystone. Like if you don't have it, you can't have any of these other things. You know, you need to have a basic respect for the system, you know, respect that there's something more important than you in this world. So other thoughts, what's all this about the shaking of the arms and the, yeah, Karen.
I didn't want to go to that, but listening to Janos talk, I was just thinking that possibly the fear part of Yirah here being directed toward how we see God. If we have a fear there that this is not the final resting place for us, that there is something afterward, then maybe that is supposed to be the driving force for good and not for humankind, to like for people to put other people in fear. That does sometimes motivate people to action, but maybe we wouldn't do the wrong thing, not because another adult tells us not to do it, but because our relationship with God says we're not supposed to do it. To me, that would make for a more beautiful world if we were motivated, inspired, whether by fear or by awe, to treat others in a positive manner, rather than not understanding the relationship between us and God, what kind of fear and awe there is for something so miraculous and something we don't understand, that we need to have fear instilled by other humans or other creatures. And I just saw that differently for the first time, and maybe somebody else does.
Thank you, Karen. That's very powerful. That would really make a difference in the world for sure. Ron. That's it.
My Heverita and I studied this for about 6 months. And believe me when I tell you, 6 months was a quick get through on this book. When Rabbi Salanter is talking about fear of God, I believe, because of what I've read in this book, that he's talking about what's going to happen to you after, not in this world, but in the world to come. A lot of this talks about the punishments that you're going to get, but it's not so much in this world that the punishments are going to come. It's in the next world. And that's basically the fear of God that he's talking about. That's what's going to happen to you if you don't follow the rules. And he spends a whole lot of time in this book. And at the very end of this book, he kind of goes onto the ideas of the Rambam regarding what you have to do to make up for the things that you've done wrong. Teshuvah that's coming up very shortly in the month of Elul and then in the high holidays. There's a whole program that he's designed to kind of offset, if you will, so that you don't have to face this punishment that, like I say, isn't so much in this world as it is in the world to come. And and that's kind of getting away from the idea of Mussar, because in Mussar, your consequences are pretty much what your actions produce right then and there, aside from anything they might incur in the world to come.
Yeah, it's sort of a great irony that he was one of the great Mussar masters, yet his focus was on the world to come, and his focus was on following the mitzvot and following the laws very strictly. He also, he understood there was a subconscious, and I think that was part of what he was talking about with this great arousal and this great embodiment. Toby and then Wendy.
I've had problems with the fear and awe issue too. I've read a lot and haven't been able to come up with anything that was very satisfactory. But I think in the current day, if you're not looking at the world to come, to me, it's sort of like the carrot and the stick. Like fear is the stick and awe is the carrot.
Mhm.
And I forget who it was. It might have been Ron who said, "Oh, looking in the Grand Canyon would be awe," which I agree. And it's generally a pleasant experience unless you're falling off the edge, I guess. But it's more of the carrot, looking at a night sky, or if you're a scuba diver being underwater with all the animals, that's more of a happy or a positive, more the carrot than the stick. But when you look at, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, God can be a pretty nasty, destructive force, let's just say.
Mhm.
So my sort of simplification is carrot and stick, but that may be an oversimplification.
Thank you, Toby. These are very complicated ideas, and we can access him on many different levels. And sometimes it's good to start with the simplest level. Wendy and then Joanne.
I thought of dancing. Your movement, your whole body is involved. And that's a way to wake up yourself and your soul. I thought he's saying develop your ability to see beyond any way you can. Don't stop until you can. Persevere, and then you'll know what to do and act on it. And by the way, his granddaughter attends our synagogue.
Really?
This was very wonderful. We were in Mussar, and she was very timid, shy, and she said, "That's my grandfather."
Wow.
I know, it was just so exciting. I may be wrong, it may be her great grandfather too, 'cause I don't know the years, but
Sure.
it was I just felt really at peace and warm when she was talking about that. And though I'm seeing his legacy, I get very excited when I notice other people's legacies.
That is exciting. Thank you, Wendy. Joanne, we'll hear from Joanne, then we'll get ready for our breakout groups.
Okay, so I just want to say that I also believe not just punishment in the world to come, but I believe in there's karma. I do believe in that concept. As you reap, so you will sow. And things come back to bite you in the butt in this world too, based on your behavior towards other people. I don't know about your behavior towards God so much, and that's a direct, you have to ask him for God for forgiveness, during the high holidays, but you also have to ask people for forgiveness. And I think our behavior in this world has repercussions in this world that can be difficult and painful.
Does indeed. Yeah, thank you, Joanne.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I've put our discussion question in the chat. So this is from Rabbi Judith Lazarus Siegel. When we wrong someone, and you're just talking about the way Jacob wronged his brother, stole his birthright and all of these things, stole his blessing, we may take that fear of what may become of us, either through divine punishment or the anger of the person we have harmed. And so this is the part where Jacob's going to see Esau again. He's like, is he going to kill me? He said he was going to kill me, and he's coming with 400 people. Is he going to kill me? So he's afraid. So we can turn that fear into something more productive. Instead of being afraid, is there a way that it can become more productive? So the question is, when you've wronged someone, how do you overcome your fear and maybe approach the person to make amends? It's sort of interesting. This kind of goes with what Ron was talking about at the end of Israel Salanter's book. There's a whole section about teshuvah. It's about how do you make it right? And can this sort of, I see this as almost like a fear to awe transition. It's sort of like, instead of being paralyzed, how can I approach this person? So I'm going to get the breakout rooms going. Looking forward to hearing where you all will take this. Okay. Okay, the rooms are open. For those of you who are streaming, thank you so much for being here. This is where our record. Hey, welcome back. So I would love to hear, how were those discussions, and have you solved the problem of sort of approaching people when we wronged them?
Well,
Steve, Nancy, and then Joanne.
Well, I kind of brought up that to me, fear and awe are pretty much the same, because I could be it's a visceral feeling in me.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I could have fear and it just goes, oh, and I can have awe, yeah, and so when I feel both of those, it's because of the unknown. Just because it's wonderful, it's still an unknown thing. And because it's fear, it's still unknown. And if I need to make amends, I do it right away. I try to do it right away or within a 24-hour period, depending on the person. And I don't like there to be any of that angst that goes on with this fear or awe. It's usually fear. I think that sometimes we don't approach somebody, because we don't know how they're going to react. But if I get it off my chest and say, you matter to me, I'm glad you're in my life, let's work this out. It's kind of up to them how they respond. But I want to feel at peace with myself and feel peace and warmth with that relationship that I developed, and hope that it continues. So that fear and all kind of go together for me.
Thank you, Nancy. That's really interesting. I love that. If I understood you correctly, this idea that you're going to move towards it. You're not going to move away from it, which could create a bigger rupture, a bigger distance. I'm going to move towards that. Yeah, because the relationship's important to you. Wendy.
Oh, yeah,
sorry,
thank you,
Joanne.
Nancy.
We'll do Wendy and then Joanne.
Okay. Thanks, Nancy. I love that you said, I don't wait. I like that. But Janos and I had a great little breakout room session, And I said, I'm not sorry. And I kind of meant that holistically, but it was interesting because he checked me on it. He goes, is that enough? And I said, no. And then we had this great discussion about expressing your, you know, that you were trying to make amends and atonement thing. And I now have a challenge from Janos, and I'm going to try it this Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I'm not going to say sorry. I'm not going to say the word sorry because so many times it's watered down and people go, oh, yeah, sure, right. But I'm not. I'm going to express myself differently to people and actually express what I've done and what I'm going to do and look for healing that way, because he told me about in Holland, they don't apologize ever. They don't say sorry. They face what they've done with talking about how it's not going to be done that way again and that they will change. And I thought that was an interesting thing because I don't want to just run around saying I'm sorry. I've seen it too many times in the grocery store when a parent will say you're sorry to your sister. And the little kid goes, sorry. Like they don't really mean it. And I know it's lack of time, but the child needs to understand, well, what's going on and in their heart. So it's important. I'm going to express my heart instead of just saying, I'm sorry. Thank you, Janos.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, Joanne, thank you for your patience.
No problem. So I was talking about my relationship with my late sister. She died in 2019 of cancer, and but our whole adult lives and even our childhood, we were kind of enemies. You know, and she'd always go, Mom always liked you best. Mom always liked you best. And finally I said, well, Dad liked you best. I know, but you torture me, you know, or, you know, I'd be on the phone with her and she'd be complaining and I'd make suggestions and no, everything I suggested, she said no. And usually she'd say, I'm going to hang up and kill myself, you know, which was lovely. She did the same thing to my mom. But one time I finally said, well, what do you think would make you feel better? And she thought of taking bubble bath or something. And I said, oh, great. You know, it was like one time it was resolved. But, you know, I try also, as soon as I realize I've offended someone, or they tell me that, I mean, this is one person I've talked a lot about who's always offended. You know, it's like almost you can't say anything to her. But don't apologize, you know, don't apologize, she'll say. It's like, so she leaves me with no way out. And I just have learned to handle her better, I guess, with more equanimity. You know, I don't get so aggravated and, oh, you know, this is how she is. And blah, blah. So, but I also agree that Nancy, that it's great to, as soon as you realize you did something wrong, to apologize. And it's on the other person whether they're going to accept it or not. Same thing with the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. You know, you can try a few times, and if they still won't accept your apology, it's on them.
Thank you, Joanne.
You're welcome.
I think it's so interesting what you were saying, and a lot of that made sense, but it also made me think, well, what if we take go back to the Yirah definition of, Yirah of the divine. And if we think about wow, if, the divine created this person, wow, they gave them a really big heap of anger. They gave, they ended up with a big heap of indignation. And I don't know whether that would help or not, but it's something that just occurred to me. So we'll hear from Karen and then we will close.
I have shared before, but there may be some new people here. One of my favorite books is called The Gift of Fear. And so I never forget that the ability to feel fear is actually as important as the ability to feel hot so we don't get burnt, or cold so we don't get cold frost. That when we feel fear, it's an alert system for us, where it gives us a chance to quickly assess and decide if we're moving toward it or away from it. And neither one is a wrong decision. It's whatever the better decision is.
Mhm.
And so fear can be seen as a gift, as one of our senses that allows us to assess situations the same way the other Mussar traits do.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Really good connection to our senses, to our survival. All right, well, thank you all so much for being here this week. We will close the way we began with a short meditation, and then we can stay on a little bit more. I don't think I got an email from anyone, but if anyone has like something that's on their mind that they wanted to tap the group wisdom for, we can engage in that. So please close your eyes. And once again, taking a deep breath through the nose and a nice leisurely exhale. As you breathe at your own pace, allow yourself to contemplate something greater than yourself. Maybe the divine, maybe it's nature, maybe it's all of humanity. It's big. When you're ready, you may open your eyes.